The autumn wind swept across the Nevada desert, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the distant promise of winter. Detective Maria Gonzalez stood outside the small ranch-style house on the outskirts of Carson City, her weathered hands clutching a plastic evidence bag that had just changed everything. Inside the bag was an iPhone 4, its black screen cracked but somehow, impossibly, still functional after 11 years of silence. It was October 15th, 2024, and Emily Johnson had been missing since March 3rd, 2013. She was 19 then, a sophomore at the University of Nevada, Reno, studying elementary education with dreams of teaching kindergarten. Her mother, Linda Johnson, had never stopped looking, never stopped hoping, never stopped checking her phone for a text that would never come. Until today. Linda's trembling voice echoed in Maria's memory from just an hour earlier. "Detective, you need to come quickly." Emily's phone, it just turned on. It's pinging. After all these years, it just turned on. Before we continue with this incredible story, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more of these mysterious cases that have captivated communities across America. The Johnson house hadn't changed much since Maria's last visit 3 years ago. The same family photos lined the mantelpiece. Emily's graduation picture from Carson High School still prominently displayed next to her younger sister Rebecca's wedding photo. Linda Johnson, now 58, had aged considerably since her daughter's disappearance. Her once dark hair was streaked with silver, and the lines around her green eyes spoke of countless sleepless nights and tears shed in silence. "Where exactly did the signal come from?" Maria asked, settling into the familiar living room where she'd conducted dozens of interviews over the years. The case had consumed her early career, and even though it had officially gone cold in 2018, she'd never truly let it go. "Pyramid Lake," Linda whispered, her voice barely audible. "The cell tower triangulation shows it was somewhere near the lake. But Maria, how is that possible? We searched that area so many times. The dive teams, the helicopters, the search dogs. We covered every inch of that shoreline." Rebecca Johnson Martinez, now 27 and a mother of 2, sat beside her mother on the worn leather couch. She'd been 16 when Emily vanished, and the loss had shaped her entire adult life. "Mom, we need to be careful about getting our hopes up. Remember what the FBI said about false pings, about old phones sometimes connecting to towers when—" "This isn't a false ping," Maria interrupted gently. "The phone was active for 17 minutes. It connected to the cellular network, attempted to sync with several apps, and then went dark again. Someone either turned it on deliberately or something disturbed it after all these years." The original investigation had been thorough but frustrating. Emily had disappeared on a Sunday evening after studying at the library. Her roommate, Ashley Chen, had been the last person to see her alive around 8:30 p.m. Emily had mentioned going for a drive to clear her head before a big exam the next day. Her 2009 Honda Civic was found 3 days later in a remote area near Pyramid Lake. Keys still in the ignition, her purse and textbooks on the passenger seat. But Emily and her phone had vanished without a trace. The search had involved hundreds of volunteers, professional dive teams, and even psychics that desperate family members had contacted against official advice. The Nevada Highway Patrol had treated it as a potential abduction, while local law enforcement initially suspected suicide, given the proximity to the deep, dark waters of Pyramid Lake. But no body was ever found, and there were no signs of foul play in the abandoned vehicle. Maria pulled out her tablet and opened the case file she'd memorized over the years. "Linda, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully. Has anyone contacted you recently? Anyone asking questions about Emily or about the case? Maybe someone claiming to be a journalist or a podcaster?" Linda shook her head. No, nothing like that. The only people who ever ask about Emily anymore are you and the occasional true crime blogger who finds the case online. Why do you ask? Because someone knows something, Maria said, standing and walking to the window that overlooked the Sierra Nevada mountains. Phones don't just turn themselves on after 11 years. Either someone found Emily's phone and powered it up, or... She paused, not wanting to voice the possibility that Emily herself might still be alive somewhere. The implications were staggering. If Emily had been held captive all these years, the phone's activation could be a cry for help. If she had died years ago and someone had kept her phone, they might be playing a cruel game with her family. Or perhaps, in the most optimistic scenario, Emily had managed to escape from whatever situation had held her for over a decade and was trying to make contact. As the desert sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Maria knew that this new development would reopen one of Nevada's most puzzling missing person cases. The phone's brief return to life had awakened not just cellular towers, but the hopes and fears of everyone who had been touched by Emily Johnson's disappearance. The next morning, Maria assembled a small team at the Washoe County Sheriff's Office. The case was technically outside her jurisdiction. Carson City Police had handled the original investigation, but cooperation between agencies had always been strong when it came to Emily's case. Sheriff Tom Bradley, a veteran lawman who'd been a deputy during the original search, cleared his schedule to personally oversee the operation. "We're going back to Pyramid Lake," Maria announced to the assembled team of 6 officers and 2 technical specialists. "This time, we're not just looking for Emily, we're looking for her phone, and we're going to treat this as an active investigation, not a cold case recovery mission." The team included Marcus Webb, a digital forensics expert who'd worked several high-profile cases across Nevada, and Dr. Patricia Henley, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Nevada who'd assisted in previous searches of the area. Also joining them was Jake Morrison, a local fishing guide who knew Pyramid Lake better than almost anyone and had volunteered his services during the original search efforts. Pyramid Lake stretched out before them like a blue mirror, reflecting the dramatic cliffs and desert landscape that made this corner of Nevada so hauntingly beautiful. The lake was sacred to the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe, and tribal police had always been cooperative with search efforts, understanding the family's need for closure. "The ping came from somewhere along the eastern shore," Webb explained, consulting his equipment. "The signal was strong enough to suggest the phone was above water, not submerged, but after 11 years of weather, flash floods and seasonal changes, it could have been moved considerable distances from wherever it originally ended up." Maria divided the team into pairs, each assigned to search a specific section of the shoreline. The fall weather was crisp but pleasant, with temperatures in the mid-60s and clear skies that provided excellent visibility. They worked methodically, using metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and simple visual searches of areas where debris might collect. It was Rebecca who insisted on joining the search, despite Maria's initial objections. "She's my sister," Rebecca had said firmly. "I've been looking for her for 11 years. I'm not stopping now." She paired with Officer Jennifer Santos, a young detective who'd studied Emily's case in the academy. Around noon, Santos's radio crackled to life. "Detective Gonzalez, we've found something. Not the phone, but you need to see this." The team converged on a small inlet about 2 miles from where Emily's car had been found. Santos and Rebecca stood next to a pile of rocks that had clearly been arranged by human hands, not natural erosion. Partially buried beneath the rocks was a piece of fabric, denim, that matched the description of the jacket Emily had been wearing the night she disappeared. "Nobody touch anything," Maria ordered, immediately calling for the crime scene team. "Rebecca, I need you to step back while we process this area." But Rebecca was staring at something else, her face pale with recognition. About 10 feet from the rock pile, caught in the branches of a small desert shrub, was a silver bracelet. Even from a distance, Maria could see that it was engraved with something. Dr. Henley carefully extracted the bracelet using proper evidence collection procedures. The engraving was still visible, despite years of weathering. To Emily, love Mom and Dad, graduation 2011. Linda Johnson had given Emily that bracelet as a high school graduation gift. It had been on Emily's wrist in every photo taken during her first 2 years of college. The bracelet's presence suggested that Emily had been in this location, but it raised more questions than it answered. Why was it caught in a bush rather than buried with the clothing? How had search teams missed these items during previous extensive searches of the area? As the afternoon wore on, the crime scene team worked to carefully excavate the rock pile. What they found beneath the fabric and stones would change the direction of the investigation entirely. There were no human remains, but there was something else, a small plastic bag containing a folded piece of paper and what appeared to be a micro SD card. The paper was weathered, but still legible. Written in pencil, in handwriting that Linda would later confirm was Emily's, was a message that sent chills through everyone present. If you find this, I'm being held somewhere north of here. The man has dark hair and drives a blue truck. Tell my family I love them and I'm trying to come home. March 15th, 2013. Emily Johnson. The date was 12 days after Emily's disappearance. She had been alive, at least for those 12 days, and she had been close enough to Pyramid Lake to hide this message. The micro SD card, if it contained any recoverable data, might hold the key to understanding what had happened to her and who was responsible for her captivity. Marcus Webb immediately began the delicate process of trying to recover data from the memory card, which had been exposed to desert conditions for over a decade. It's going to take time, he warned. The card might be completely corrupted, but if there's anything on here, photos, videos, even partial files, we might be able to piece together what Emily was trying to tell us. As the sun began to set over Pyramid Lake, Maria felt the familiar mix of hope and dread that came with any major break in a cold case. They were closer to answers than they'd been in 11 years, but those answers might be more devastating than the family was prepared to handle. The discovery proved that Emily had survived her initial disappearance, but it also confirmed that she had been taken against her will by someone who had managed to evade capture for more than a decade. The investigation was about to enter a new phase, one that would require revisiting every lead, every witness statement, and every piece of evidence from the original case. Somewhere in northern Nevada, there might be answers waiting, and possibly, though Maria hardly dared to hope, Emily Johnson herself might still be alive. The forensics lab in Reno worked through the night, processing the evidence found at Pyramid Lake. Maria had returned to her apartment in Carson City, but sleep was impossible. She sat at her kitchen table with Emily's case files spread before her, cross-referencing every mention of a blue truck in the witness statements and police reports from 2013. At 3:47 a.m., her phone rang. It was Marcus Webb. "Maria, you need to get down here. I recovered something from the memory card. You're not going to believe what Emily managed to capture." 20 minutes later, Maria was back at the lab, staring at Webb's computer screen in disbelief. The micro SD card had contained dozens of corrupted files, but 3 short video clips had survived intact. The first showed Emily's face, obviously recorded in secret. She was whispering to the camera, her eyes wide with fear. "It's March 14th. I think it's March 14th. I've been here for 11 days. The man who took me, his name is David Hutchins. He lives in a cabin somewhere near Winnemucca. I can hear trains in the distance, and there's a mine shaft visible from the window. If something happens to me, please tell my family that I fought. Tell them I never stopped trying to come home." The second video was even more revealing. Emily had managed to film through what appeared to be a window, showing a distant view of railway tracks and what looked like an abandoned mining operation. In the background, partially visible, was a blue pickup truck parked next to a weathered cabin. The third video was the shortest, but potentially the most important. It showed a man's hand placing a tray of food on a table. On his wrist was a distinctive tattoo, a small eagle with the words Semper Fi underneath. "We need to run the name David Hutchins through every database we have access to," Maria said immediately. "Military records, DMV, criminal history, property records in the Winnemucca area. And we need to do it quietly. If this man is still alive and still in the area, we can't risk spooking him." Webb nodded. "I'm already on it. But Maria, there's something else. The metadata on these files shows they were recorded on different dates. The last one is time-stamped March 16th, 2013. That's 3 days after the message we found at the lake. This meant Emily had been held captive for at least 16 days after her disappearance. She had somehow managed to get to Pyramid Lake, hide the message and memory card, and then either been recaptured or forced to return to her captor. The implications were staggering. By dawn, they had preliminary results. David Hutchins was a real person, a 54-year-old former Marine who owned property near Winnemucca, Nevada. His military record showed an honorable discharge in 1995. But his civilian life had been more troubled. He'd been arrested twice for domestic violence in the early 2000s, though charges were dropped both times when the victims refused to cooperate. Most significantly, DMV records showed that Hutchins owned a 2007 blue Ford F-150 pickup truck. Sheriff Bradley assembled a tactical team by 8 a.m. "We go in prepared for anything," he told the briefing room. "If Emily Johnson is still alive and being held on Hutchins' property, this is a rescue operation. If she's not, then we're dealing with a homicide suspect who's been free for 11 years. The property was located 43 miles northeast of Winnemucca, accessible only by a dirt road that wound through scrub brush and abandoned mining claims. Satellite imagery showed a small cabin, an outbuilding, and what appeared to be the blue truck Emily had captured in her video. As the convoy of law enforcement vehicles made its way across the Nevada desert, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against time. The phone's activation 2 days earlier couldn't have been a coincidence. Someone knew they were getting close. Linda Johnson sat in her living room, surrounded by family and friends who had gathered when news of the breakthrough reached the community. Rebecca held her mother's hand tightly as they waited for word from the search team. The local news had gotten wind of the story, and reporters were already gathering outside the house. "I keep thinking about what she must have gone through," Linda whispered to her daughter. 11 years, Rebecca. If she's still alive, if she's been held prisoner all this time. "Mom, we have to believe she's strong enough to survive this," Rebecca replied, though her own voice betrayed her fears. "Emily never gave up on anything in her life. She wouldn't give up on coming home to us." The tactical team reached Hutchins' property at 11:30 a.m. The cabin appeared deserted, with no smoke from the chimney and no sign of recent activity. The blue truck was there, covered with years of dust and showing signs of mechanical neglect. But as they approached the building, Officer Santos noticed something that made her blood run cold. Fresh tire tracks led away from the property, heading north toward a network of old mining roads that could take someone deep into the wilderness or to any number of small towns scattered across northern Nevada. The cabin itself told a disturbing story. Inside, they found evidence that someone had lived there recently. Fresh food in the refrigerator, a bed that had been slept in, and most chillingly, a room that had clearly been used to hold someone against their will. The windows were boarded up from the inside. There was a chain bolted to the wall, and scratched into the wooden floor were dozens of tally marks, as if someone had been counting days. On the table next to the bed was Emily's iPhone 4, connected to a solar charger. "He's been keeping it powered," Webb realized immediately. All these years, Hutchins has been keeping Emily's phone charged. The question is why? A thorough search of the cabin revealed more evidence. Photographs of Emily taken during her captivity, journal entries written in Hutchins' handwriting, documenting his obsession with her, and most importantly, a newer cell phone that contained recent communications. The text messages painted a picture of a man who had become increasingly paranoid and unstable. The most recent message, sent just hours after Emily's phone had pinged at Pyramid Lake, was to an unknown number. They found the lake spot, moving to backup location, dispose of package if compromised. The response was equally chilling. Understood. Package secured at new location, awaiting further instructions. David Hutchins hadn't been working alone. After 11 years, Emily Johnson was apparently still alive, still being held captive, and she had just been moved to a new location by accomplices who had been helping Hutchins evade capture for over a decade. The investigation had just become a multi-state manhunt. The FBI's involvement transformed the case overnight. Special Agent Patricia Coleman arrived from the Las Vegas field office with a team of specialists in kidnapping and human trafficking cases. The evidence from Hutchins' cabin suggested this wasn't an isolated crime. The level of organization and the existence of accomplices pointed to something much larger and more sophisticated. "We're dealing with a network," Agent Coleman explained to the assembled law enforcement team at the Winnemucca Police Department. The text messages recovered from the cabin reference multiple packages and locations. Emily Johnson may not be David Hutchins' only victim. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Jake Morrison, the fishing guide who had helped with the lake search, contacted Maria with information he'd initially thought was irrelevant. 2 days before Emily's phone had activated, he'd been guiding clients near Pyramid Lake when they'd encountered a man acting suspiciously around the area where the evidence was later found. He claimed to be a researcher studying erosion patterns, Morrison told Maria over the phone. But something felt off about him. He was nervous, kept checking his phone, and he had fresh dirt under his fingernails like he'd been digging. I took a photo of his license plate just in case. The plate number led to a rental car agency in Reno. The man who had rented the vehicle was Thomas Brennan, a 47-year-old construction worker from Sacramento with no apparent connection to David Hutchins. But digital forensics revealed that Brennan's phone number matched one of the contacts found on Hutchins' device. Within hours, surveillance teams were in position outside Brennan's Sacramento apartment. They didn't have long to wait. At 2:15 p.m. on October 17th, Brennan emerged carrying a duffel bag and got into a different vehicle, a white panel van with no rear windows. The FBI followed at a distance as Brennan drove east on Interstate 80, then north on smaller highways into rural California. Their destination became clear as evening approached, a remote compound near the Oregon border consisting of several buildings surrounded by high fencing and security cameras. "This is much bigger than we thought," Agent Coleman radioed to her team. "We're looking at what appears to be a fortified compound designed to hold multiple people against their will." The tactical team's assault on the compound began at dawn on October 18th. What they found inside would shock even experienced law enforcement officers who thought they'd seen everything. The facility contained individual cells designed to hold captives, a surveillance room monitoring multiple locations across several states, and evidence of a human trafficking operation that had been active for at least 15 years. In the third building they searched, agents found Emily Johnson. She was alive, though physically and psychologically traumatized by her 11-year ordeal. At 30 years old, Emily had spent more than a third of her life in captivity, moved between different locations and facilities as part of what investigators would later determine was a sophisticated criminal network specializing in long-term abduction and exploitation. Emily was conscious and coherent when agents found her, though she initially didn't believe that rescue was real. "Is this really happening?" she asked Agent Coleman through tears. "Are you really taking me home?" The medical evaluation at the Sacramento hospital revealed that Emily had been kept in relatively good physical condition, suggesting her captors had planned for long-term imprisonment. Psychologically, the trauma was severe but not insurmountable. Dr. Sarah Kim, the psychiatrist assigned to Emily's case, was cautiously optimistic about her recovery prospects. "She's shown remarkable resilience," Dr. Kim told Linda and Rebecca during their first reunion at the hospital. "The fact that she never stopped fighting, never stopped trying to leave messages and clues for people to find, that tells us that Emily never gave up hope of being rescued. That strength is going to be crucial for her recovery." The reunion between Emily and her family was private, but Maria was allowed to be present as both an investigator and someone who had never stopped looking for her. Emily's first words to her mother were simple but profound. "I always knew you'd find me. I never stopped believing you were looking." The investigation revealed that Emily's case was connected to at least 12 other missing persons cases across Nevada, California, Oregon, and Utah. The network had been operating since the early 2000s, targeting young women who fit specific profiles: college students, women traveling alone, those who might not be immediately missed. David Hutchins was arrested 3 days later at a motel in Idaho, apparently abandoned by his accomplices once the network was compromised. Thomas Brennan and 4 other suspects were taken into custody at various locations. The compound near the Oregon border yielded evidence of crimes spanning nearly 2 decades. But for Linda Johnson, Rebecca, and the community that had never stopped hoping, the most important outcome was simple: Emily was coming home. The Nevada desert looked different to Emily Johnson as she sat in the passenger seat of her sister's car, returning to Carson City for the first time in 11 years. The landscape that had once been familiar now seemed both achingly nostalgic and strangely foreign. Rebecca drove carefully, glancing frequently at her sister, who was seeing the outside world as a free person for the first time since she was 19 years old. "The mountains look smaller than I remembered," Emily said quietly, her voice still carrying the careful, measured tone that Dr. Kim had warned them might persist for months or years as part of her psychological recovery. "But more beautiful too. I used to take all of this for granted." The Johnson family home had been prepared for Emily's return with input from trauma specialists. Her old room had been cleaned and updated, but kept essentially the same, providing familiarity without the pressure of trying to recapture her teenage years. The community had respected the family's request for privacy, though the front porch was filled with flowers, cards, and welcome home signs from neighbors and strangers who had followed her case over the years. Linda Johnson stood in the doorway as her daughters approached, tears streaming down her face. The embrace between mother and daughter lasted several minutes. 11 years of separation and hope finally resolved in that simple human connection. "Welcome home, sweetheart," Linda whispered. "Welcome home." The legal proceedings that followed would take years to complete. David Hutchins and his accomplices faced federal charges including kidnapping, human trafficking, and multiple counts of conspiracy. Emily's testimony, given in closed court sessions with victim advocacy support, would be crucial in ensuring justice not just for her own case, but for the other victims who had been identified through the investigation. Detective Maria Gonzalez received commendation for her refusal to let Emily's case go cold, but she was quick to point out that the resolution had been a team effort spanning multiple agencies and 11 years of persistent investigation. "Cold cases are never really cold," she told reporters at a press conference. "They're just waiting for the right piece of evidence, the right witness, or sometimes just the right moment when everything comes together." The phone that had started it all, Emily's iPhone 4, became a symbol of both her ordeal and her survival. Investigators determined that Hutchins had kept it charged and occasionally activated it as part of a psychological manipulation tactic, but Emily had managed to use it to hide evidence that would eventually lead to her rescue. She never stopped fighting, Agent Coleman explained. Even in captivity, even after years of imprisonment, Emily Johnson continued to leave clues and create opportunities for rescue. Her intelligence and determination saved not just her own life, but the lives of other victims we might never have found otherwise. 6 months after her rescue, Emily spoke publicly for the first time at a press conference organized to raise awareness about long-term kidnapping cases. She appeared alongside her family, flanked by the law enforcement officers who had worked her case, her voice steady and clear. "I want people to know that hope is real," she said. "For 11 years, my family never stopped looking for me. Law enforcement never stopped investigating, and I never stopped believing that someday I would come home. To families dealing with missing loved ones, don't give up. To survivors of trauma, healing is possible. And to the people who worked to bring me home, thank you for proving that every life matters, that every case matters, and that justice may be delayed, but it doesn't have to be denied." The Emily Johnson Foundation was established later that year, focusing on supporting families of missing persons and funding advanced forensic technology for law enforcement agencies. The Foundation's first major initiative was the development of improved database systems for tracking long-term missing persons cases across state lines. Rebecca, now a victims advocate herself, became the Foundation's executive director. "Emily's case taught us that time doesn't diminish hope," she said at the Foundation's launch event. "It doesn't matter if someone has been missing for 11 days or 11 years. Every missing person deserves the same level of investigation, the same commitment to finding answers, and the same belief that they can still come home." Emily herself enrolled in online courses to complete her education degree, a dream deferred but not destroyed by her ordeal. She expressed interest in working with trauma survivors and potentially joining the Foundation's work, though her therapists emphasized the importance of focusing on her own healing first. The Nevada desert that had once been a place of mystery and loss became, in time, a landscape of recovery and renewal. Emily Johnson had disappeared into that vast expanse as a 19-year-old college student. She emerged from it as a 30-year-old survivor, forever changed but ultimately unbroken. On quiet evenings, she would sometimes sit on her family's front porch, looking out at the Sierra Nevada mountains and the desert beyond. The view that had once represented captivity and isolation now symbolized freedom and possibility. The phone in her hand, a new one, with her family's numbers programmed in and location services always enabled, connected her to a world she was still rediscovering. The case of Emily Johnson's disappearance and recovery became a touchstone for law enforcement agencies across the country, proof that persistence, technology, and old-fashioned detective work could still triumph over even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises. But for Emily herself, the most important victory was simpler. She was home, she was safe, and she was free to build whatever future she chose. In the distance, a phone notification chimed, not with the fear and uncertainty that had marked her years in captivity, but with a message from her sister, her mother, or one of the many people who had welcomed her back into a world that had never stopped waiting for her return. Emily Johnson had vanished in the Nevada desert on a March evening in 2013. 11 years later, when her phone mysteriously activated near Pyramid Lake, it set in motion the events that would finally bring her home. Her story became a testament to the power of hope, the importance of never giving up, and the truth that sometimes, against all odds, the people we love really do find their way back to us.